Thanks everybody for coming out tonight. All right, so to our discussion tonight of reform, revolution, and resistance. What do these terms mean for the left in 2019? What have they meant historically? And how can our understanding of these terms help us confront the obstacles and opportunities for building a left that's adequate to the 21st century? My name is Platypus. I'm the chapter head of the Platypus Affiliated Society. Platypus is not a University of Oregon OSU merger. It's not Dr. Gilles Jaune. But it's a membership-driven, campus-based project of self-criticism, self-education, and ultimately, with the eye of ultimately the practical reconstitution of a Marxian left. We do this through a variety of activities. We've had public fora, and I think previously in this room in September we did What is Socialism? We did 50 years of 1968 a little while ago as well. We also have a free monthly broadsheet, the Platypus Review. It's available around campus, and the recent issue, last two issues, feature Corvallis's Alex Riccio, along with, in the first issue, with interviews with two veteran Black Panthers, so that's pretty cool. There we go. This happened last time. Okay, I'm going to just start the audio another way when we get going. We also have a weekly informal discussion, Coffee, Politics, and Left, which is Wednesday at 5 p.m. at Marketplace Lounge, just across from the piano. And we have a reading group that meets at Tuesdays at about this 6 p.m. at the Valley Library. So to get involved, we have a sign-up sheet if you want to sign up. And have little things to toggle there. And you can also follow us on Facebook. Now, tonight's panel, I'm just going to get in suspense. I'm just going to get another audio recording going here. We also have a lot of these, we've been around since 2007, and we have all these recordings of events from right across the world, including this panel that we're doing tonight. So let me just get that going. Forward. Here we go. This will do. Okay. So tonight's panel was posted across Platypus chapters around the world. It was started in 2007 in Chicago in the last moments of the Iraq anti-war movement and the beginning of the Obama presidency. It was also a year after the attempt to reestablish the 1960s Student for a Democratic Society, or the SDS. It was held again following the 2008 downturn in the wake of occupying the anti-austerity politics in Thessaloniki, Greece, London, England, Frankfurt, Germany, and several locations in the US and Canada. But since that moment, we saw Obama's re-election, the disappointments with the presidency and things like Black Lives Matter, and then we saw the 2016 election. So a lot has changed since this panel was last hosted. Tonight's panel is meant to reflect on this recent history of what's happened since, as well as the deeper history of the left, to consider what we face today and how it might help us deal with the future. At the time, when we started this panel off, we had this quote. It was by a 1960s generation New Left person who passed away last year, Moishe Stone, and he was considering the limited scope of opposition to the war in Iraq. And this is the quote. It's a little dense. Here it goes. After the failure of the 1960s New Left, the underlying despair with regard to the real efficacy of political will, of political agency, of getting things done in a historical situation of heightened helplessness, became a self-constitution as an outsider, as another, rather than an instrument of transformation. Focused on the bureaucratic stasis, this kind of things that weren't changing of the Ford estate, late 20th century world, the left echoed the destruction of that world by the dynamics of capital, specifically in what came afterwards, neoliberalism and globalization, which it sounds like that you guys have that film screening coming up, which sort of reflects on the tail end of that. The idea of fundamental transformation became bracketed, and instead was replaced by a more ambiguous notion of resistance. The notion of resistance, however, says little about the nature of that which is being resisted, or the politics of the resistance involved. Resistance is rarely based on a reflexive analysis of the possibilities for fundamental change that are both generated and suppressed by the dynamic heteronomous order of capital. Resistance historical context of capital and its reconstitution of possibilities for both domination and emancipation, of which the resistors do not recognize that they're a part. And I think what this is sort of grasping is over the 20th century, there's been changes. We had like the welfare state collapsed. So these changes have taken place, and the question is, can you transform society, or are you just bound up with the changes? To help us consider these big questions, we have our panel here today. Charles Bond, he's a member of Our Revolution Corvallis Allies. Our Revolution Corvallis is committed to engaging the Corvallis community in local political action to create a society for everyone. As he mentioned, they're going to be hosting a Bernie 2020 organizing kickoff on April 27th. Nathaniel Owen is a post-bac student, right there, studying conservation at Oregon State University, and he's one of the co-chairs of the Heart of Valley Democratic Society of America. And finally, we have William Spaldone. He's a historian at Willamette University and an activist in the Salem area. He specializes in the 20th century German and Austrian labor history, having written several books on this subject. In 2013, he also published European Socialism, A Concise History with Documents, which I understand is going to be coming up in its second edition. Politically, he's a member of the Democratic Socialists of America and Solidarity since the late 1980s. In the 1990s, he supported the merger of the Socialist Party of Oregon. In the 1990s, he was a co-chair of the Socialist Party of Oregon, and in 1999, he supported the merger of the Socialist Party of Oregon with the Pacific Green Party of Oregon, and was a member of the party's state coordinating committee until 2002. In addition to that, he's also served on Salem City Council from 1999 to 2002. The panelists have 12 minutes to provide opening remarks. We're then going to provide them with 3 minutes to remark on each other's thoughts, highlighting things that they thought they agreed with, perhaps points of difference. So for you as an audience, when it comes time to the Q&A, you can come up, listen to the conversation carefully, and sort of weigh in with your own thoughts, remarks, questions on what they said. I promise, and Plum is going to be monitoring the live stream should the 25 people on there want to weigh in on this. The Q&A is going to run to 60 minutes. I promise we're going to leave here at 9. We're not going to go over. So with about 15 minutes to go, I'll take the last round of questions, and then it'll give an opportunity for our panelists to provide, answer those questions, but also to provide summary remarks. With that, round of applause for our panelists. And if it's okay, Nate, we'll move down this way. Start with you.
I wasn't prepared, but okay.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Nate Owen. Again, I'm one of the co-chairs of the Untitled Chapter of the DSA. So what I'm going to be talking about, I think mostly is what I see as what these terms and these ideas mean to the millennial left, especially. I'm a millennial. Most of the people I know are millennials. But I guess I should say that nothing I'm saying is necessarily representing Heart of the Valley DSA official positions or anything. So as far as resistance, reform, revolution, I was thinking about this. I was thinking how these ideas sort of pop up in my dealings with other millennial leftists. And the first thing that occurred to me is that I don't think that you will ever catch any millennial leftist describing what they do as resistance or reform. I think that the term resistance has basically been co-opted by the sort of neoliberal Democratic Party hashtag resistance that basically just wants to return to a time pre-Trump, to the 2016 status quo. And that's not enough. And I think people my age know that's not enough. And as far as reform, I don't think you're gonna find any millennial talking about reform, basically for the same reason, because we're at a point now where small steps aren't going to cut it, and that's becoming more and more obvious. So for myself and a lot of people I know, we got into leftism basically learning about climate change. And it's pretty hard to look at what scientists are telling us we can expect given climate change, and to see what the capitalist status quo is providing as answers to that problem. And it doesn't take a lot of insight to see that the two are mismatched. that nothing that's being put on the table right now is anywhere near enough to address the scale of the problem. And so I think for that reason, if you're talking to a millennial leftist, they're going to tell you that what they're engaged in is revolution. And this term revolution, I think, is sort of serving to cover a wide range of strategies. So even people who you would maybe typically associate what they're doing with the term reform, especially thinking about Bernie Sanders in particular here, they're calling what they're doing revolution. And again, the point, whether you want to call it reform or revolution, the point is that there's an understanding that there needs to be a strong break, not just a small, gradual getting to some point in the future. So as far as what I see as the general trends on the left, what people are doing when they say they're doing revolution, basically I'm seeing a lot of lines blurring. I don't see anybody dogmatically sticking to one approach or even one type of theory. So I mean, if you pressed me and asked, what's my political belief, I would describe it in the broadest terms as anarchist. But I knocked doors for Bernie in 2016, and I'm going to support Bernie in 2020. And I think that this is sort of a trend you'll see across a lot of young people, is that they basically got their hand in a bunch of different buckets. And I think that this comes from that same thing I was talking about earlier, about like we just need to do whatever we can do as soon as we can do it to change as much as we possibly can. And I think that a lot of that right now is being channeled into electoralism because there's seemingly this sudden chance to get a foot in the door with people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Bernie Sanders, and the like. It seems to me like for the first time, certainly in my lifetime, I expect in much longer, there's actually a serious chance that people calling themselves socialists are going to get into. There you go.
Yeah, our time.
Are getting into positions in the U.S. government, and I think that's exciting for a lot of people. I think that there's some distrust of that too. My adolescence was bookended on one side by the financial crisis, and on the other side, on one side by the war in Iraq, and on the other side by the financial crisis. And I think that there's also a general distrust of institutions. And this isn't, I'm not the first one to make this observation, but this isn't unique to the left either. I think that the right is also finding that the traditional sources of power, the traditional institutions, are not cutting it for whatever it is that they want to accomplish. So let's see, is there anything else I wanted to say about that? I think that when you're talking about the millennial left, a couple things that you have to consider is, first of all, we didn't grow up with the USSR. The Berlin Wall fell when I was 1 year old. So I've never, there's never been a strong socialist government or any sort of counterbalance to the U.S. At all, in that sense that we could look at and say, okay, well, so that's generally the idea we're looking for. We're basically inventing it from scratch. There's also a severe lack of unions. I know I've had 6 or 7 jobs in my lifetime. I've never been a member of a union. I suspect most people you talk to under 30, they're going to tell you they've never been a member of a union either. And so when there's no unions and there's no sort of, statist socialist project to turn to, we're basically left to invent ideas ourselves or to combine old ideas. And I think that you'll find that strict categories that may have cut out the previous generations aren't really going to apply neatly to what millennials are doing. That's all I have to say.
So I actually agree with a lot of what you just said. It's really, it's nice seeing that much information from somebody your age. And in case somebody can't tell, I'm not a millennial. Just about that much. Sorry, it's been a long day. I'm a Bernie Sanders supporter. I was in 2016, but I wasn't always as awake as I am now. So So the only way I can explain how I feel what revolution means, and I agree, resistance is nothing, it's not enough, it doesn't do anything. We can't just resist, we need to fight back. So my idea of revolution, the way I can explain it is by telling you my story, of where I came from and how I got to where I am here now. And I can try to do that pretty quick, but we'll see. So I grew up in a family that was not politically active, like, at all. My mom can't vote, she's not from this country. So growing up, voting wasn't considered a thing as a necessity. We didn't talk about it, we didn't talk about even presidential races. We didn't talk about anything political at all, zero. So when I became a young adult, I kind of followed the same thing. And at some point I started voting because someone said, hey, you need to register to vote. And I was like, oh, okay. I didn't know anything about it, I wasn't educated on the subject. But time went on and kind of continued that, and I think I only voted in presidential elections. I didn't know any better. And I think a lot of people from my generation might be facing a lot of the same thing. Then I met my wife, and my wife was kind of mad at me, told me I was wrong, and we started voting every single election, I think. But still, voting's not enough. That's just like, that's the minimum you've got to do. And after moving to Oregon, I know she likes to volunteer me for things, so she signed me up to phone bank for Obama. And we did, and that was a terrible experience. And I moved on. I said, I'm never doing that again. I'm never going to help out a campaign ever again. Don't do that. Then my wife decided to host a watch party for one of the Bernie Sanders, I think it was one of the first town halls or forums or something early on. Debate. Thank you. And I had no interest. I was like, okay, whatever, But I went because, it's my wife and I respect her. So sitting there watching it, that was the first time I've ever heard any candidate, and I don't care what level of government, speak to what I saw my entire life is going on around me that I had no control over. Something I thought that you can't change this is just how life is. And then I realized, listening to talk, you can change it. There is something you can do. You can get up, you can stand up, you can shout back, you can fight, and more importantly, get involved. So I got involved. So we started volunteering for the Corvallis for Bernie campaign locally. Ended up becoming one of the lead organizers for that group, along with a few other people in this room. And we opened our own local office because Corvallis was not big enough to have an actual campaign office that was linked to the campaign. But we did the work here anyways. We funded it ourselves, we staffed it ourselves, we gathered volunteers, we were at the farmer's market, we did everything we can to be as visible as we can, and then we started knocking doors and making phone calls and doing everything that you think big campaigns do, but we did it right here in Corvallis. And because of that, Benton County had the highest voter turnout for Bernie Sanders in 2016. We showed it can be done. It can be done with just a few people, small groups, and then change. But then what? So a good friend of mine that I met through the campaign ended up becoming a delegate for Bernie Sanders and was going to Philly. So we raised money to help him send him there because something a lot of people don't realize is these delegates that go, they have to pay their own way. The government doesn't pay for it. Nobody pays for it. You have to pay for it yourself, and it's very expensive. So we raised money for him, and then he went, he invited me to be his +1. So I went to Philadelphia during the Democratic National Convention, and I saw what was going on, and I was outside the protest. And that'll be an experience I'll never forget. It was amazing. But then there's the plane ride back, and everything's winding down, and Hillary won, and it's all terrible, and the world's coming to an end. Sorry, this is what was going through my mind. And I ended up talking to a friend of mine who was a previous city councilor here in Corvallis. And he said, hey, Ward 3's open, you should run for city council. And I'm like, what? I can't run for office, I don't know what I'm doing. But I did learn a lot from the Bernie Sanders campaign, and I thought about it, and what did Bernie say to do? Get involved, run for office. So I came back and I ran for city council in 2016. I started a late campaign, didn't have the information I needed, didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't win. But I took 43% of the vote against a 3-term incumbent. And I'm nobody. And so we got back to work, reformed our Revolution Corvallis Allies, kept doing the same work, we kept campaigning the same way we always did. We were at a farmer's market, we were talking to people, we were hosting rallies in front of us, we were helping other organizations with their rallies, and we held big rallies. And we kept fighting back, and not just resisting, but standing up and shouting back. Then, the next round of elections came, and I decided, well, I'm going to run for city council again. We got more organized, we learned our lessons, we learned where we went wrong, and this time I won by 15%. So I'm currently serving on City Council of Corvallis, and I am nobody. Anybody can do this. We can all stand up. We can all run for City Council, school board, or even go as high as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, although I couldn't. I don't know if I can do that. But she is a normal person. You know, we can all do this, we can all fight back, and that's the change we can make. That's what revolution means to me. It's what Bernie Sanders' revolution was about, which is real change happens when we get up, get involved, and make change ourselves. And if we all do that, all across the country, and hopefully all around the world, we'll see the change we desperately need. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bill Smallbone. I wish I was a millennial. But I'm not. I'm an old historian. And so my job tonight is to talk a little bit about the historical relationship between reform and revolution, and then to try to link that with our contemporary politics. And so I have to go back and begin in the half century prior to the First World War. At that time, the socialist movement became a mass movement in virtually all advanced industrial countries. New socialist parties were founded to compete for parliamentary power, while socialist-oriented trade unions struggled to win better wages and working conditions for workers. Socialist parties around the world were united in the International Working Men's Association. And to many socialists, and even many of their opponents, it seemed like history was on the side of socialism. The fundamental goals of the movement were clear. Socialists strove to create economic and political equality for all people, regardless of class, race, or gender. In the economic sphere, this meant replacing an economy based on individual competition with one based on cooperation and planning. To achieve that goal required the transformation of private property and the means of production into social property under the control of the democratic state. In order to democratize the state, the movement called for equal rights for all citizens and a series of reforms that would give the working class majority control over parliament and control over state institutions. In Germany, for example, the workers demanded proportional representation in the parliamentary system. By far, the strongest socialist party in the world was the German Social Democratic Party, which in 1912 had over 1 million dues-paying members and 4 million voters in an electorate of 12 million. It was not only a powerful electoral machine, but together with its trade union allies, its enormous press, and hundreds of political, cultural, and educational organizations, the party was capable of mobilizing hundreds of thousands of supporters on the streets at any given time. Although there were disputes over whether socialism would be achievable via parliamentary reform, violent revolution, or some combination of the two, no one was quite sure what the revolution would look like. And relatively little was said about the kinds of institutions and policies that would be necessary to carry out the actual transition to socialism. The day-to-day bottom line for most socialist workers was to win a majority in Parliament and to use the Parliament as the instrument that would usher in the new socialist order. The Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 and the German Revolution of 1918 were both complex processes that unfolded in the context of war and economic collapse. Both were violent affairs driven from below as waves of popular unrest fueled by opposition to World War I swept away the old order. Both involved the creation of institutions, new institutions, such as councils of armed workers and soldiers, or Soviets in the Soviet context, in the Russian context. These served as organs of radical grassroots representation. In Russia, under the leadership of the Bolshevik Party, the Soviets overthrew the bourgeois parliamentary republic that had been established in the spring of 1917. Between 1917 and 1921, in the midst of a brutal civil war, the Bolsheviks eliminated all their rivals in the Soviets and created a one-party state that they called the dictatorship of the proletariat. This Bolshevik-controlled Soviet system expropriated most of Russia's private property and transformed it into state property. Theoretically, the new state was controlled by an alliance of the small urban working class and the huge peasant majority, which had gained land in 1917. After 1928, however, the party crushed the peasants and subordinated them to the needs of industrialization and urbanization. Meanwhile, in Germany, where the massive urban proletariat was the best organized and most class-conscious in Europe, the revolution of 1918 did not lead to the creation of a Soviet-style republic. Instead, a majority of the workers and soldiers in the revolutionary councils favored the creation of a parliamentary system. It is true that a minority of workers broke with the socialists and, following the model of the Bolsheviks, formed a new communist party. But the socialist-led government crushed communist efforts to seize power. Unable to command an absolute majority in elections to the Constitutional Convention of 1919, the socialists then backed the creation of a progressive but capitalist republic in which they eventually hoped to move towards socialism by winning majorities and gaining control over parliament. As they had before the war, most socialists remained committed to parliamentary politics as a means of effecting change. Both of these revolutions had to grapple with difficult questions. For example, must socialism come to power via violent means? If not, then how? Can one move towards socialism within the framework of a parliamentary republic? Or, in a global capitalist system, is it possible to create socialism in one country, or must the revolution be international in scope? A third question, if socialism is an expression of workers' power, then what elements of the old order should be excluded from participation in the new system? If one excludes the middle classes from participation, doesn't that increase the possibility of civil war? What does it mean to socialize the means of production and create a cooperative, democratically organized economy? Should all the production be planned by the state, or should there be a role for the market? If you turn control over the factories to the workers, how should consumer interests be represented? These are just a fraction of the major questions that had to be debated and worked out, and remained, by and large, in the 20th century unsolved. Over the course of the 20th century, socialists and communists all over the world argued over these and many other issues. Following the Second World War, in much of the developed world, the reformist model supported by social democracy dominated. In countries with strong social democratic movements, capitalism remained intact, but the state reined in many of the capitalist system's worst aspects. Wealth was more equitably distributed, average people achieved historically unprecedented standards of living, and economic security and opportunity. In some places, such as Central Europe, strong unions also were supplemented by elected councils within enterprises, giving workers substantial influence over their working lives. In Eastern Europe, in China, and in many post-colonial states, the Soviet model held sway. There, too, workers achieved modest advances in education, in living standards, and in security, but within the framework of political dictatorships in which political elites crushed all dissent. Meanwhile, in the United States, where the radical labor movement was largely broken in the repression of the 1950s, the small socialist and communist groups were marginalized and had little influence. Progressive change here was dependent largely on people's movements, like the Civil Rights Movement, which fought in the streets and built alliances with elements of the Democratic Party, which was certainly not pro-socialist. In the 1990s, the end of the Cold War and the demise of most Soviet-style regimes seemed to confirm the claim of Margaret Thatcher and others that there was no alternative to the free market and capitalism. Many social democratic parties swung to the right and adopted neoliberal policies that made them scarcely distinguishable from their right-wing rivals. They betrayed their working-class constituencies and sought to win middle-class adherents. To many, socialism seemed a dead letter. But by moving to the right, ironically, social democratic parties also created a vacuum on their left, one that is being filled by the emergence of new socialist formations, some of which, like Syriza in Greece, Podemos in Spain, the Left Party in Germany, and the Socialist Party in Holland, have substantial support. Distance from the Cold War, the economic collapse of 2008, extreme inequality, and the increasing clarity of the ongoing climate disaster have also opened the door to a revival of socialism in the United States, the country historically most hostile to the idea. The Occupy Wall Street movement of 2011 was clearly anti-capitalist in sentiment, but it did not focus on organization building. With the arrival of Trump World in 2016, however, American socialism received its biggest boost since the 1930s. For example, in the last 2 years, over 50,000 people have joined the Democratic Socialists of America, which has been around for decades, but had also been small and gray and bald. A great question facing socialists in the USA today is not reform or revolution. The left does not have the strength to blow up the system. The issue is, what is the best vehicle to build a movement for radical change within the current political framework? How can we win large numbers of people for the socialist project? I think most people would agree that, as in the past, we need independent radical organizations that can mobilize people in the streets to press for radical change. At the same time, we need a political party that can fight for those changes in the parliamentary arena. Both the parliamentary and the extra-parliamentary struggles should be complementary. Both should engage in mass education and movement building. Both should work to build new social, cultural, and political institutions that can model the future and help in the fight for change. Many on the left, including myself, have long argued that it is essential to build an independent and socialist mass party that can fight for power. After 40 years of trying, however, I don't know if this is possible. Unlike a parliamentary system, the so-called two-party system is effectively rigged against all comers, and many have found it in their attempts to challenge it. At the moment, the DSA's approach of supporting both radical independent candidates outside the Democratic Party and socialist and progressive candidates inside the Democratic Party, to me, makes good sense. It has helped us to put actual socialists in Congress and to create real possibilities for transforming key public goods from commodities to be bought and sold into rights for all citizens. Here we are talking, for example, of socialized health insurance, free public education, and the Green New Deal. These things would not have been on the agenda if it was not for the gains made most recently. My instinct tells me that the Democratic Party can never be transformed into a party that challenges capitalism. Experience indicates, though, that it would be even harder to create a rival by splitting the Democratic Party. We might get a new party, but that victory could result in the right getting control over the state for years or decades to come. And given the mess we are in, especially in regard to the environment, we simply don't have the time. So I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Fantastic. I give you guys a chance to just make some quick remarks on what you heard from one another. I know you've sort of been thinking about your remarks in isolation. The one question I have is, there is this question of building political independence, which, one of the ways that this panel was organized is around a pamphlet written in the time that Bill mentioned, Reform or Revolution, where it wasn't posing reform versus revolution, more it was a kind of political current within the socialist movement that didn't see the need for a social or political revolution. In some ways, they thought it would sort of emerge. It would emerge from the system. And so there is this question of building up independent political power, which I think all three of you addressed. But the question is whether that power is leading to something transformative or will just become. You brought the parties up in Europe, which also instituted austerity when got into power. So it's not as though the new formations will necessarily I think you all aspire to. So that's the one thing. And the second thing I had on my mind is what happens if, how will you be doing things differently if Joe Biden or Kamala Harris win the primaries? Will it make any difference to what you're doing?
Don't think about that.
Okay.
Well, sorry, I didn't try to move with first. So I do agree that we do need more than the two-party system. I've been a proponent though that that's a long road, and we should be working towards that. All of us. But I do believe that like Bernie Sanders says, the Democratic Party is the easiest channel for us right now. And I listened to that in 2016. So my first election wasn't to winning city council. In 2016, I did a write-in campaign to become a precinct committee person, which is the little grassroots of a political party. And I won with 7 votes. So that was really easy to do. I had friends write me in. And I learned from there, I mean, that's where you can make change right here in your own county. So it doesn't matter what county you live in, what state you live in, they all have the same kind of process. And, you know, then you ask yourself, well, what does that mean? What is that going to do here in Benton County? And so then I ended up starting to go to the state central community. So that's where the state party is for here, is the Democratic Party of Oregon. And I was going just to meetings, and they have these caucuses that talk about specific issues or whatever. And they were doing a reorganization. So all these organizations hold reorganizations every 2 years. It's standard. And you can run for any of these positions. I ended up becoming a caucus chair for the Democratic Party of Oregon, which gave me a state central committee delegate to vote. So now I'm voting on state issues and what we do at the state level. So, you know, there's these layers, and you can get involved at any level of it. It's easy. So we have been swinging the Democratic Party of Oregon much further left. We're not done, obviously. There are roadblocks. We're running into a lot of resistance there. But at the same time, I do support, you know, more than just a single third party. I think we need many parties to really make this country be representative of the people.
Yeah. So I agree with a lot of what you said, but not with your conclusion. I think that, similar to what Bill was saying, I think it is really important that we do get people that share our point of views elected to office. I think the more people we get in office, the better. But I primarily see that as basically a defense, preventing things from getting any worse while we build that second pole of power. Because taking over the Democratic Party would be a long game. But the thing about all of these tactics that we're talking about, that is different from the 1960s, that is different from the 1890s, is we've got 12 years to get to zero emissions. So we don't have 40 years to try to build another political party. So that's why I say that we need to build that independent dual power structure, but use electoralism in order to support that, in order to pass legislation that is amenable to our project. Like I said, in order to make things not get any worse. And there's also a quote from Hugo Chavez. I'm not going to say it in Spanish, but it translates to something like, yes, we need to build socialism, but in the meantime, people need to be fed. And, you know, I don't think that getting Medicare for all is going to bring about a socialist government in the U.S., but I would really like it if I could see my doctor while I'm building dual power. So I think that it is an all of the above sort of strategy. But I think we need to be serious about the fact that we're not going to overthrow the U.S. government in 12 years, either by getting elected into all of the top positions or by violently overthrowing it. And I think that, I'll just touch on this briefly, but there's issues with ending our goals with taking control of the U.S. state and then using it to improve lives of people in the U.S. Because the fact of the matter is, all of the wealth that's going to come, or that's going to be used in order to improve our lives, is going to be coming from exploitation in the third world, and we just can't get around that. And unless we're okay with having a socialist country here where we're getting universal health care, we've got a Green New Deal, but it's all paid for by African slaves. I mean, I know that's not okay with me, and I assume it's not okay with most people on the left. So these, I mean, again, I don't have an answer, but we can't shy away from those kind of questions either.
Well, I think that it may be possible to take over the Democratic Party. And as I said in my comments, I think that it would be extremely difficult. But I also remember a time, I know some of the people in the room also remember this time, when the Republican Party was a very different party, right? When it had people like Nelson Rockefeller in it, right? Who, these days sounds sort of like Lenin compared to the people who are running that party now. Nelson Rockefeller built the New York State higher education system, an outstanding public education system, right? Which again shows you how the discourse in this country has shifted over the last half century. Right? It's unimaginable now to think of the Republican Party making those kinds of investments, right, in the country's public life. So it may be possible to take over the Democratic Party from the left and transform it in ways that we would like. But I agree that if we were to try to do that, this would take a long time, right? So even if we could multiply the Ocasios of the world pretty rapidly, it would take a long time to displace the establishment of the Democratic Party. Therefore, we have to be firing on all of our pistons. And this means organizing big time outside of the Democratic Party, right? So in a way, you know, look at groups like Black Lives Matter, okay, who were able to basically shape the discourse in this country, right, in ways that we hadn't seen since the civil rights movement of the 1960s, right? We can organize those, we can get behind those kinds of movements in the street. We can try to link them together. We can build bridges with people outside the country, right? And we can work, we can straddle, right? Like the DSA is doing now, we can straddle, right? Working outside the Democratic Party and inside the Democratic Party, right? And take advantage of the Democratic Party whenever it's to our advantage. Right? Without, we can't lose our heads over the Freedom Democrats, okay? So when we win in the Democratic Party, that doesn't mean we've won the Democratic Party, because they are full of entrenched power, right? And they will not give up without a good fight. But we can use them, right? And we can build outside. So we have to do both things at once, and we have to do it in every sphere. That's the way I think you're right. We have focus.
Yes, I think I was misunderstood or didn't present myself correctly. You're right. Changing the parties or building new parties is not the short-term answer by any means. It is going to take time, but it doesn't mean it's not something worth pursuing. And that's part of the reason why I really think we need to look, speak with our local municipalities and our local elected officials, because we can make change right here at home. This is where change starts. It doesn't start in Washington, D.C. It doesn't start even in, in Salem. It can start right here at home. So taking local politics into account of this, recently Corvallis released their strategic operating plan for the next 5 years, which their goal for the next 5 years is to switch to 35% renewable energy. Given that we have actually 11 years, I think we're heading towards, that's not enough. That's not gonna meet even the first minimal goal that we need to meet. So I'm pressuring them that I'll be going back in September and tell them, no, we need to hit goals. They're gonna reach what the scientists are telling us. And that's the only way we're gonna make any difference, because why even bother if we're not gonna do that? So I agree, we need to change the parties, we need to create new parties. We also need to work with our elected officials, and if they can't listen to us, we replace them. And that's where we find as many people can to run for office, not to sway the party necessarily, but to make the changes we need to see happening right now.
Fantastic. Got 15 minutes for Q&A, and I'll take a stack there. So there, and we got 2 questions.
In addition to thinking about parties, you might think about the different parts of the government. Because it's really because of the primary system. The presidency is now a different kind of office. In my own lifetime, the primaries have become extremely important. When I was a kid, they hardly mattered. But because of that, the presidency is a kind of a loose cannon. I mean, Trump was not the choice of the Republican Party establishment. And the same thing to some extent was true with Obama. I mean, less so, but the party establishment wanted Hillary Clinton. So if you want relatively quick change, the presidency gives you that opportunity in the system now, because you can get people who are outside the party establishments, and because of the primary system, because so much weight is based on what happens in those primaries, you can kind of circumvent the parties. You can sort of undermine the system if you can get behind a presidential candidate. And you only have a president for 8 years and so forth. There are limits to that, but in terms of big change in a relatively short period of time, the presidency is the opportunity. I mean, and recent history shows that the presidency is a kind of, I mean, this kind of, I think the first time time this really happened was with Jimmy Carter, who came out of absolutely nowhere. And so, the presidency has a different kind of, they're not really, it's not really in control of the parties. And so I'm thinking of strategy, I think thinking about the presidency, should give a lot more thought to the presidency.
So is that something that you see within the prospects of like taking the presidency, that the DSA would be able to run a presidential candidate, or that, I guess with Bernie Sanders, there was a prospect that he could have been the Democratic nominee. We've seen how the Democratic Party pushed that.
Right. Yeah, so I completely agree with what you're saying, is that is one aspect that we need to focus on, but we can't take our eyes off of the issues at hand as well. But that's why, our organization and myself supported Bernie Sanders in 2016, because we saw that as the quick change. He was talking about issues that no other candidate would dare talk about, and he's still to this day talking about the same issues, and if you look back, he's been talking about them for 40 years. So he's the candidate we can get in now. It doesn't matter what the Democratic Party likes, as long as they don't, cheat him out of it some way. And I firmly believe he would win in the primary, or not the primary, but in the general election too. And then he can implement that change that we need within the next 8 years after he's in. We can actually have that change happen immediately. Agreed.
Yeah, I think that Bernie Sanders, maybe I'm being optimistic, I think he has a good shot at being president. Certainly, way better than he had in 2016. And I think that he can make a lot of difference in that office. But who else in the U.S. political scene is even anywhere close to Bernie Sanders in politics? I just don't think, I think that it's important that we fight for that, but that we sort of, like you were saying, just keep our eye on the ball, and remember that Bernie Sanders, if he does get elected, isn't likely to suddenly, pass an executive order making private property illegal or something. He's gonna.
Well, he could.
But even things like significantly less revolutionary than that. From my own point of view, I've seen him move to the right on a lot of issues that I am really unhappy about just in the last couple of weeks. So I think that it's important, and I think we can get a lot of very good things done by electing him president. But just that it's not the be all end all.
Well, Bernie wouldn't necessarily have to be the only person we have appointed.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that who else is even close to?
I know, I'm talking about thinking, strategically and thinking about the presidency as a kind of a link in the system.
Well, I'd love to have a president who agrees with us. If Bernie Sanders gets elected, I'm going to smoke my very best cigar. However, he faces a whole system.
Yeah.
Right? And the system is not going to capitulate to whoever happens to be in office. Think about what happened to Obama. I remember when everybody was rah-rah about Obama. And, it was nice when Obama got elected, but everybody who was paying attention knew this guy is a centrist Democrat.
Yep.
Right? And he was regarded by the Congress in which he had a majority in his first 2 years, as too far to the left. His own party ran away, right, when it came to, for example, strengthening trade union rights, right? He kept struggling. And then in the second half of his first term, of course, then it was basically over because the Republicans were in a position to block him. So I think, do I want to use the presidential election season, right, to build a movement for somebody like Bernie Sanders? Yeah, but much more important is using that movement to build broad support on all levels, especially the local level, where we need to build healthy organizations that are not organized around one person. That was the big mistake when I started out in politics back in the 1980s, when we were all rallying around Jesse Jackson, right, who was a tremendous charismatic figure, who built the Rainbow Coalition. And then when he lost his big struggle at the end of the 1980s, he didn't convert that organization to a massive organization to build broad-based support. He built it into a machine oriented around his person. And I think we have to be really cautious about that. We're about movement building, right? One person is great. A president with us is great, but it's not the main thing.
Well, and I'd like to add something to what you were just saying and to this subject is, with Obama actually did have the support of people all across the country and people rallied to him. But then during his inauguration speech, he ended it with, "Thank you, I've got it from here." He's dismissing the people. Where Bernie is telling us, no one man can do this. Even if we get Bernie elected or somebody that's super progressive that shares our ideas, they're not going to accomplish everything on their own. It's going to take us. It's going to take all of us.
So I just want to say one more thing on that topic, just because I know you're talking about the institution of the presidency and the promise that holds for making very sudden big changes. But I think that we might want to consider the possibility that it's more open to making big transformative changes if they're changes to the right than if they're changes to the left. And I think we'll find that's the case.
You were next in stack. Anybody else want to get into stack? There, okay.
My understanding, based on the graphics that we saw published after the 2016 election and the recent midterm election, was that the biggest political divide in the country is urban-rural, and that the left doesn't have too much trouble controlling, or not controlling, but like Democratic Party certainly doesn't have too much trouble getting support in its urban centers. So I guess, but that rural areas continually vote right. So I guess my question is, what are organizations like the DSA going to do to reach out to and recruit in rural areas that are far away from their own centers, where it's like it's not as easy to get people to come to stirring rallies in rural areas where they're remote and spread out?
Yeah, so there are obviously unique challenges in trying to organize rural people. We're actually considered a rural chapter here, but I assume you're talking about people more rural than Corvallis. And to tell you the truth, I think that DSA in general has the same problem, that it has a lot of people in the big cities and doesn't have a lot of people in more rural areas. I can't speak to that too much specifically, but I know that there's recently been specific moves to try to engage rural people. There's a rural caucus, a rural small town caucus that's recently been founded for exactly that reason. Yeah, I think it's a challenge. I think that the way it's done is by showing people what it is that you can give them, basically. I don't know, to be honest. It's a challenge.
I have not seen any kind of platform for rural, to win rural support from within the DSA, not yet. To be honest, I think the DSA is overwhelmed at the moment. In 2016, there were 5,000 members, and now there's 60,000 members. And I think they're having trouble getting all the names on the list, right? It's overwhelming them. But I am hoping that as we move forward and begin to think about building bridges to rural people, we will learn to talk to rural people, and that we will learn to make their issues into our issues. Now forgive me for thinking historically out loud again, but historically the socialist movement, one of its biggest mistakes was to tell the peasants all over Europe and elsewhere, you people are historical anachronisms. You will be swallowed up, okay, by industrial farming, you will all become proletarians, and then you will join the workers' movement for revolution. People don't like being told that they are anachronisms. They don't like being told that they belong to the past. And when that happens, they become very conservative, right? If not outright reactionary. And that's what urban people in this country are telling rural people for way too long. And the socialist movement better learn that, and better learn how to converse with them and make their issues our issues.
So for our Revolution Corvallis allies, I mean, we're Corvallis, so we don't deal with a lot of rural population. But one thing we do is the key word in our group is allies. So that is where we have reached out to the rural community. We're allies with Rural Oregon Progressives. And that's was originally a Bernie Sanders group that actually helped form Corvallis Bernie back in 2016. 2015, 2016, and we still work with them and help them with their events, and host their events out in the rural community, out in Sweet Home, Lebanon, and other parts of Lane County. So, I mean, or Lane County, I was mixed up. So, I mean, that's the base thing we do, is we can find people that need the support, because there are people that are, progressive or very, very left, that live in rural communities, but they're really alone in those areas, so the best thing to do is to support them in what they're doing.
So, going back to we have 12 years thing, and community organizing is great, but if it's 100 companies produce 71% of global emissions, and I don't think that can be solved at a local level. So what can we do about that, basically?
So I think it's good, and also just to pick up on that point, there seems to be there's a national organization, but then there's these local initiatives, and it seems like the question of the presidency question is well, actually, change comes from below, but you have this example here of how it seems like a lot of these decisions are beyond bending county.
They are. So, I mean, the one thing, there are advantages once you're in an elected position, which is then you can convince your other elected officials on your, say, the city council to agree with you, which I think in Corvallis most of them do. Then we can petition as a council to, our state legislators to make changes there. So when we can pass laws that stop those companies from being mass polluters and creating emissions that are, that are addressing, contributing to climate change. It's not an overnight thing. So, I mean, it comes down to, we need to start holding our elected officials accountable. They're the ones we elect to represent us. And what we want is change and have these companies, stop doing business as usual. Then as our elected officials, they need to take that action. We need to hold them accountable to it.
There are two ways, or maybe more than two, but two come to mind right away. One, on the city council levels, you can start to create municipal utilities, if you want to do, right? So if you have utilities in the town that you can run according to your principles, there's strong investments for towns and local communities to take over the utilities and run them themselves. So that's one thing. The second thing you can do is you can, at the state level, right, or at the national level, you can either impose such strict regulations that private companies are forced to adhere to them, and you can interpret corporate rules differently than we've been doing in this country for the last 100 years. You can convert corporate entities into true community organizations. One of the reasons why that doesn't exist now is because the Supreme Court in the 19th century decided that corporations can basically act on their own without conforming to their charters. Right? You can do it that way, or you can expropriate them. You can take them over. And it's certainly outside of the United States, this is done all over the world. Right? When governments decide a company needs to be taken over for the public good, they do it. Right? So that sounds perhaps outlandish in the American context, but these are outlandish times.
Yeah, I'm going to echo just basically what's been said so far, that it's going to need to be an inside-outside sort of project, because it isn't just enough to dismantle these companies. You have to find a way to fulfill the functions they were fulfilling when they were dismantled. And I think that's going to be at the local level. It's a matter of well, how can we get our food from just our municipality instead of from California and Florida? And it's about, how do we get our energy? So I think that the way you address that on a local level is building those sorts of either mutual aid networks or just institutions that are able to meet those needs without burning carbon, basically.
Right. Any other questions? That's right. Mike, and anybody want to get on the stack? Okay, great.
I think in the United States we've experienced about 50 years of declining living standards, at a time while the economy is growing, but the benefits to workers have stayed flat. And I think that in general, I think that's created a sense of despair where, people believe the system doesn't work for them. And they're right, the system doesn't work for them. But that can easily be translated into libertarianism and anarchy. We say, well, I don't care about politics because government's never done anything for me, and so screw it all. And I think that's kind of what happened in Germany in the 20s and 30s, and then, led to fascism. And I think in the United States, kind of, I think maybe it was the strong socialist and labor movement that we had to kind of protect us from that there was a real possibility if the capitalists didn't make concessions and do something for the workers, then it's very likely there would have been a revolution here. But anyway, I see a real danger of this attitude of government never does anything good for anybody. The libertarian attitude that the best thing is to have no or small government, and I see that as a real danger now, that it's going to be difficult through our federal or state official organizations, the U.S. Congress or state legislators, to accomplish anything because of this despair. People have a belief that government cannot solve our problems. And you can tell me I'm wrong. I'd be happy to hear that. But also what kind of organizing can we do to convince people that that there is some value in the social organization that we call governments?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I meant to touch on it more in my introduction because I think that that's the other sort of pole to climate change for young leftists especially is the feeling that there aren't really any prospects. And I think that it's contributing to, like you said, young people, like I talked about in my introduction, basically saying, well, this isn't going to be solved with small steps. Whatever happens needs to be a huge rupture. And it's not just leading to libertarianism, I mean, it's leading to outright fascism in some cases. And so it's dangerous. And so I think you're right that we need to start showing people that it's not a matter of giving up on the systems, but on building our own systems, and say, like, listen, when you think that this system isn't working for you, you're absolutely right, but it doesn't have to be this way, and we can build a system that does work for us, and we can do it together, basically. I think that outreach is really important right now because the despair can lead to reactionary directions rather than in directions that we would hope it leads in. But I don't think that it's a matter of convincing people that the system actually is good and actually can solve their problems. I think it is a matter of saying, well, we can build a system that does that.
Nate, can I just add one thing onto that question? Because one thing you said in your remarks is that what really marked this moment, unlike other moments, is that you have people with very different ideological understandings actually in practice having no disagreements. Like they have arguments about ideas,
Yeah.
but those ideas don't have any bearing on in terms of political organization. And just picking up on Mike's comment, what do you think that means?
I think that it means that we're so far from power that those differences don't matter right now. So in part of the Valley DSA right now, we have an election going on. We're running a candidate for school board, and we are doing a mutual aid campaign. And you've got anarchists working on the school board campaign, and you've got Leninists working on the mutual aid campaign. Because at this point, we're so far from power that it's just any step you can take to make people's lives better is what we need to be doing right now. And we can argue about whether we should have a one-party state or a parliamentary state. We can argue about that when we're actually closer to getting power.
So, Mike, I agree with you. I mean, there is concern. I've talked to younger people who think, government's a waste of time. There's no, that we just need less government because they're just intruding on us, when really they're not. I mean, what they're doing is giving more power to the wealthy. They're not helping us. It's true. But what do? Are we just going to allow it to happen and say we don't want government? Because it's still going to happen. That's why I encourage, my big thing is getting more people to run for office and getting more people involved in the decision making, because that's how we can show them that the system can work. But it's not gonna work unless we're doing the work. If we allow others to make the decisions for us without at least pressuring them to make the decisions we want, or making the decisions ourselves by getting involved, then, you know, I spent too many years sitting on the couch complaining about the way the world ran and didn't bother, you know, what I do about it. I just complained. You know, but now I'm not. Now I'm in a position where I can make those decisions that better my community. I can make, you know, my voice is heard, and I can continue to pressure even my elected officials at, like I said, the state level. I can talk to my representative because he listens to me now. And so that's what I encourage everybody to do, because, you know, we can't just let other people steer the ship.
I think in order to restore legitimacy of the state, you have to deliver the goods, right? Whether those goods are things like medical insurance or free public education. When you start delivering the goods, when you expand the range of public goods that's developed at all levels of our lives, and local government delivers many, many more services that people need from day to day, right, than the national government. When you're working on all those levels and you're experiencing successes, victories, right, I think then people who generationally have felt that the government does not work for them can be brought around. I mean, that's my hope. If that's not true, then there isn't really much hope for us. Right? If we can't convince people, right, by delivering goods that they find useful, then there isn't really much hope. Then we'll slide right into the kind of horror that we're talking about, right? Okay, with fascism. I'll give you one example of things in Salem, how things have worked recently in Salem. For about a dozen years, Salem was under the control of a right-wing cabal based in the city, basically the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce is the full-time right-wing political party of local government. And the left in our town occasionally has been able to win fleeting majorities, but then the right reorganizes, they mobilize money, and they've driven us out. But in recent years, the left has finally formed a permanent organization called Progressive Salem. And over the course of 3 elections, we drove the right from power. We now have a very solid majority. Right? And this majority is answering to groups like 350.org on the one side, right, who are pressing the city council now to implement the kind of environmental policy, right, that they were hesitating to do before, but now they have a majority to implement. Also, we have this bridge in downtown Salem. They want to build a 3rd bridge, okay, which would have been just one more way, okay, to you know, get a cement contract, okay, and just expand the problem we now have. And the current council defeated that, okay, and this has resulted in a sea change in Salem politics. Right? Chamber of Commerce is starting to really stew on this, and it'll be very interesting to see what kind of political fight it does. But people really feel like they have a stake in it. When they feel that way, then I think you're on the way to restoring legitimacy.
Something that came up in Nate's remarks, I think you started to say, if you talk to any millennial today, reforms, it wouldn't be for reforms, it wouldn't be for resistance. But what I hear described here is like peace, almost like sewer socialism, like achieving very concrete reforms at the local level. And I wondered how you sort of thought about that in terms of your opening statements, to the extent that, how do you think about that?
Yeah, so part of what I was saying with my opening statements is that reform is falling out of favor, but that there are people doing reform and just calling it revolution. I've never heard the term sewer socialism before, but yeah, I'm a municipalist. I think that that we can do a lot of good, like Bill was saying, we can do a lot of good on the local level in providing material benefits for people. I think what I don't trust, and I guess maybe I'm just one of these people Mike was talking about, is that I don't really trust, the U.S. government to be anything but, like I said, maybe it can provide us health care. And I think that maybe part of that is what I've seen, when I think of a socialist political party, I think of like Hollande in France. They're basically the second international parties in general, and they're called socialist parties, but they're neoliberal parties. Maybe they were socialist at one point before I was alive, but they're certainly not now. And so there's a sort of distrust of like national political parties saying that they're socialist. And yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just outright admit that I don't have a lot of faith that there's going to be anything that the U.S. government can do that's going to end the problem for good or be more than just a Band-Aid while we fix the problem ourselves.
Fantastic. So, just Huang's next. Is there anybody else who had a question? Okay, we've got.
Okay, so I guess going back to the question of revolution reform, I guess my concern would be that when there's a blurring of reform and revolution, I guess we kind of have a tendency to lose sight of the goal. I think there's a recognition that there's an appetite for socialism and change, whatever that might mean, but that without a really or theoretical understanding, you're not going to be sure what that, there's no agreement on what that change would be, and I think there's a risk that it would fizzle out very quickly. At least that's I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I agree with what you're seeing. I mean, I've seen it within the state party a lot. You know, I'm involved with the Democratic Party of Oregon, and I see a lot of people who think that they're progressives, but yet they're fighting against the change that we've been wanting. And they nitpick things apart. So I see where the lines get blurred and people forget what's our end goal. What's the most important thing we want right now? It's not about the little things in between, because that will steer you wrong, and you will start focusing on details that really aren't going to benefit us or help us. And that happens a lot in local organizations as well. They start, infighting and nitpicking over minor details that really aren't important. So I mean, how to get people to see the bigger picture and think of that end goal, that's going to be a challenge, and I don't really have an answer for that. I mean, and in our Revolution for Los Alamos, we've all had disagreements. We're all from different walks of life and different backgrounds, but in the end, we stick to our long-term goals. But I don't know how we do it. We just do. So I don't have an answer or a solution. But that's.
Yeah, I totally agree with your concern. I think a lot of people share it, and a lot of people are even more anti-electoral than I am, or than I have been tonight. I don't consider myself anti-electoral, but there are people that are for that exact reason, because they're afraid that there's going to be a million people that elect President Bernie Sanders, and then they're like, oh, we're done, we did it. It's probably going to happen. And I think that we need to educate as many people as we can, while we have the spotlight on someone like Bernie. But I really would go back to just this idea of local organizing and local people-powered institutions as sort of like a second pole of power. Because when you are just in an organization that's just like you and your neighbors, and you're just taking care of your street, you're never going to forget about it, because that's where that's your life every day. And I think that we need to start thinking of ways that we can get people to be more directly democratically involved, and less so turning over power to someone else, whether it's a socialist elected official or anything else. And I think if we keep people involved like that, it's going to be less likely that they forget the goal, or that they stop running too soon or something.
I agree with what's been said. I would also add that what I think is most important is that people understand that socialism is an idea, right? It's not an end state, right? And what the job of the movement is to put the idea into the front of people's minds, right? And not any individual. Individuals are fleeting, right? They come and they go. But to build a movement, right, that has real roots, that can establish itself on the local level, that can build its own culture, right? Has to be a movement, right, that it has to be a set of ideas that people can envision, right? And one of the things that the socialist parties did, right, when they were really movements of working people that brought real gains to working people's lives, is that they put forward very simple programs, page or two, not 500-page policy books, okay? Very simple programs that allow people to develop a vision. And then those organizations, that is those movements, allow the many branches, right, the many local organizations, right, to work for those goals, right, building their own local cultures, right, and sometimes embarking on projects that are very different than the things that we're going on now. So it's the idea that's the key. It's not an individual. So if Bernie Sanders does the job for us for the next few years, it's fine with me. Right? But what's much more important is that when he's done with his job, he's left a stronger set of institutions that embody those ideas. That's the most important thing.
Any questions from out in the universe there? No? Any other questions? I guess maybe this is a good opportunity to wrap up. The one thing that I wanted to a couple points on the panel, there was this question of sort of like, well, we have to do this because we're weak. And you also brought up the formulation, Bill, of, there's a kind of way in which we're going to use the Democratic Party. Is it not just as likely, given the power, the disparity in power, that the Democratic Party is going to use all of you?
Well, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, in a way, they're like the Blob. Remember Steve McQueen and the Blob? The way to destroy any potential rivals is to simply absorb them. Okay? So that's the danger.
Yeah.
So that's why I say the ESA can't just go into the Democratic Party. It has to remain independent of the Democratic Party, work both inside and outside the Democratic Party, constantly vigilant about its own identity and mission. If it does those things, then we're in a better position to keep the Blob at bay.
Interesting. Way to put it.
How do you feel about the Blob?
I agree. I mean, we've had members of our organization, many of us are Democrats and have been involved with the local Democratic Party. Some of us have moved on to be involved with the state party. But at the same time, we have members who are not Democrats, members of the Green Party and elsewhere. And so, yeah, I agree completely. We need to keep what we're doing is what we're doing, and we do some of that within the party, but we don't stop doing what we're doing outside the party as well. We need to continue with routes. We need to continue with, finding new candidates to run for positions, and they can be nonpartisan positions like school board and
Just to make it more, so let's say Joe Biden gets the nomination, and you built this really great network on the ground. Are you all going to sort of like abstain, or will you sort of get behind Joe Biden's campaign?
That's tough. I try not to think about it. I mean,
That's
so-
an individual choice.
so
Can you
honestly,
speak for everyone?
huh?
Can you speak for everyone? I mean,
No, I can't.
all right.
But my own opinion is, as at this point, thankfully we live in Oregon. This is a very blue state, and I don't think we have any worries about, Trump winning Oregon. So we don't do much work nationally, but I think at this point, anybody that could beat Trump will be a step in the right direction, even if it's somebody as terrible as Joe Biden. I don't want Joe Biden. I don't want another neoliberal. I don't want somebody who's going to focus on helping corporations just destroy our planet and our lives and keep us all oppressed. Not what we want. But at the same time, we never stopped. So we had a major loss in 2016. It didn't stop what we were doing. We continue doing the same thing, which is educate people locally about the issues and keep fighting for those issues. And we'll continue to do it regardless. Whether Bernie Sanders wins or doesn't win, or Joe Biden wins or doesn't win, it doesn't matter who's elected president. We'll continue doing the same work.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely echo that last part. The presidential election's nice and all, but it's definitely not the main thing we're doing. I think that one thing that's really important when working with the Democratic Party is that you just have to make sure that you have some way to hold them accountable. Without getting too far into sort of inside baseball, you all probably heard that the DSA recently endorsed Bernie Sanders, and there's a lot of contention within the DSA about that, about the way it was done, particularly the fact that there just basically wasn't any way to hold Bernie Sanders accountable. And so maybe a week after the DSA endorsed him, he came out with this nonsense about we have to keep foreigners out because they're taking our jobs. And we had no way of saying, well, Bernie, you can't be saying that if we're going to be endorsing you. So you just got to make sure that you have some way of holding these people accountable. I know that one DSA member ran for Congress up in Washington in 2018. Sarah Smith was her name, and she didn't win, but she had an institution set up where she was constantly meeting with movement leaders, and that she planned to keep that up after if she had won the election. So we just need to make sure that we have some way of holding them accountable, that it's not an Obama situation, that it's not a, I got it from here.
Yeah, I guess, you know, for you, it's like, what would happen if Joe Biden got elected? What happens if Bernie Sanders got elected? How would you hold Bernie Sanders accountable? How would the DSA be able to do that? What's in your mind of like how that would work?
I'm not convinced that it can, you know, which is, you know, why I personally had issues with that process. But, you know, I think we would hold him accountable the way we hold any Democrat president accountable. You know, through demonstrations, through local work, through other elections. But ultimately, you know, it's not about a person, and there's not really any person that's going to save us except for ourselves. So
it's a great last round of applause for our audience, for our panel. Remember, there's some great events coming up, and there's some literature at the bottom. It looks like with the DSA, there's even like stickers and pins. So you, there's stickers and pins either way you go. Thank you very much, everybody.
Well said with great response.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Very good.
Good job, you guys.
Yeah,
Very good. Oh, this is fantastic.
I'm also going to put a sign-up sheet for the DSA at the end, if you all want to get on the email list.
I'll take care of that. Yeah. Thanks. It's really great. That's really impressive. Just a little like what you guys do. The other thought that I had was this is coming from.
Maybe these go over there.
Thank you very much.